In episode 22, Enforce Least Privilege Access Across Systems and Roles, we make a simple promise that carries real impact. Smaller blast radius through precise permissions and oversight that you can prove any day of the week. Least privilege is not a slogan, it is a pattern of small choices that keep power narrow, traceable, and time-limited so that a mistake or a breach does not turn into a catastrophe. The payment card industry, PCI, rewards that discipline because tight access is the shortest path to fewer incidents and faster audits, which means fewer distractions for your team and more confidence for your customers. We will turn the idea into a daily rhythm that reduces the places an attacker can stand, shrinks the number of paths they can take, and records what happens along the way so you can show your work without digging through scattered tools. By the end, you will have a clear way to pick one high-risk group, trim its scope with measured steps, and capture the evidence that proves the change made the system safer in ways that anyone can understand. Start with roles that describe work, not people, and not vague categories that feel comfortable because they are large. A role should map to a business task that someone actually performs, expressed in plain language that a manager, an auditor, and a new hire can all read without translating jargon, which keeps the discussion honest about what the job really needs. Forbid catch-all groups that collect every right under the sun, and do not allow undocumented entitlements that sneak in through mergers, vendor defaults, or one-off emergencies that never received a cleanup, because those are the roots of silent privilege creep. When a role exists to read reports, write it as Read Reports for Region West in the Finance tool with no export beyond the scheduled report, and then bind that line to a concrete set of rights across the applications that deliver the task. When roles read this way, changes become small, reviews become faster, and arguments about exceptions turn into focused conversations about the exact job to be done, which is how least privilege stays alive in a living organization. Segregation of duties is the quiet backbone of least privilege because it prevents a single person from creating a risk and hiding it at the same time. Separate administration from operation and review so that the hand that deploys is not the hand that approves and is not the hand that reconciles, which breaks the chain that allows silent abuse to thrive. A person who configures payment routing does not also approve the change window or reconcile the settlement report. And a person who grants access does not also perform the access review that certifies it, which keeps self-interest out of the loop. This is not about mistrust. It is about clean lines that reveal errors and force collaboration in the open where it is easy to spot odd patterns before they turn into losses. When you draw these lines on paper and then enforce them in your identity tools and your change process, you get a system that makes insider mistakes less dangerous and outsider intrusions easier to contain, which is exactly the protection the card brands expect when they talk about strong control of access and changes. Trustworthy identities are the foundation, so start with strong, authoritative sources and let them drive groups that systems consume without manual retyping. Use a human resources system as the owner of hire, change, and exit events. Then sync those events to identity and access management with clear ownership and a ticket for every non-standard edge so you can tell who touched what and when. Make each group have a business owner and a technical owner whose names sit on the group record, which gives every entitlement a place to knock when questions arise and a person who is accountable when drift appears. Sync those groups to applications with connectors that write logs you can search, and refuse direct assignment in the target systems unless a formal exception calls for it, because local hand edits are where transparency goes to die. When your identity graph flows from a single source of truth and moves through repeatable sync with change tickets attached, your access picture stops being a mystery and becomes a living map that anyone can read. Administrative power should not last longer than the task that needs it, so give elevation just in time and make it hard to miss when it happens. Just in time, JIT, elevation means an engineer starts with a modest account, requests higher rights only for a specific change, proves their identity with strong factors, and works inside a session that is captured for later review so nobody has to guess what happened. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, should be baked into every elevation path, and you should add simple checks like ticket references and peer acknowledgement for high-risk actions so that the context is tied to the event. Session capture should show commands, prompts, and outcomes so that you can spot dangerous patterns, coach better habits, and reconstruct a misstep with less drama, which is how you teach without blame and still keep standards high. When elevation becomes routine, it stops being annoying and starts feeling like a seatbelt, which is the right mental model for power that could hurt people if used carelessly. Shared accounts are the enemy of accountability because they wipe the fingerprints from the scene even when everybody is acting in good faith. Remove them by issuing named credentials for every person and every bot. Then log every privileged action with the subject, the target, the time, the method, and the reason, which turns every event into a sentence that explains itself. If an old product requires a shared login at a control plane, hide it behind a broker that maps each human to an individual token so the audit trail still names a person rather than a generic label, and keep a ticket that explains why the exception exists. Rotate credentials on a schedule that matches the risk. Pull credentials immediately when people change roles or leave, and use systems that can prove a rotation really happened rather than trusting a checkbox. When named accounts and full logs become the norm, you gain the ability to see patterns and to tell real stories about what occurred, which makes detection faster and reduces the need to guess during an incident. Access reviews are not yearly ceremonies. They are short, regular reconciliations that match access to work and clean up drift before it grows teeth. Tie your review cycle to real events that change risk, like job changes, team transfers, and project closures, and make managers certify only the rights their people hold, not an entire catalog that dulls attention and invites rubber stamps. Reconcile against human resources status so that departures and leaves of absence turn into immediate access changes, which turns a critical control from an aspiration into an automatic reaction. When a review surface shows a person, a role, and the current entitlements with a clear accept or remove choice, you get decisions in minutes and a record that explains itself without translation. The faster a review moves and the closer it sits to real work, the more likely it is to stay honest, which is how you avoid the silent rot that makes breach reports so painful to read. External access should never arrive at a target system naked, so wrap it in gateways that see the device, the posture, the context, and the risk before they decide yes or no. A contractor with a healthy device in a known location during a known window is not the same as a random laptop from an untrusted network at an odd hour, and your decisions should reflect that difference with clear logic that sets expectations for everyone. Use device posture checks that look for disk encryption, updates, and signs of compromise, and feed that into the access decision so unhealthy devices cannot walk through even when the password is correct, which blocks a whole class of simple attacks. Add contextual rules that measure location, time, and behavior, and log those decisions in language a human can read later, since you will need to explain why a session was allowed or denied during a review. When gateways carry the weight of rich context, your applications can stay simpler, and your edge becomes a place where surprises are handled with fewer special cases. Stale accounts and orphan permissions do not announce themselves, so design reports that discover them and quarantine them quickly without drama. Look for accounts that have not logged in during a defined window, roles held by nobody, rights that no longer map to a named role, and tokens that never expire. Then move these into a safe, disabled state while you investigate. Notify owners with clear messages that ask for a keep or remove decision, and set a timer that removes the rights if nobody answers, which flips the burden towards safety instead of inertia. When a person returns from leave or a project restarts, you can restore what was needed with a click, and you have a record that shows the stair steps of discovery, quarantine, and recovery. The discovery itself should run on a schedule and write to a place where security and operations both watch, because shared visibility is the antidote to the quiet backlog that grows behind closed doors. Service accounts deserve the same discipline as human accounts, but with rules tuned to the way software works. Give each service account the least scope it needs, bind it to the specific systems that call it, and avoid blanket rights that cross environments or tenants, because those become ladders for attackers who gain a foothold. Rotate secrets on a set cadence and on material change, and use non-interactive policies so that nobody can log in with a keyboard to a service identity, which prevents a whole class of lateral moves. Keep a record that shows what the account does, who owns it, how to rotate it, and how to revoke it, and make every rotation and revocation write to the same place as human changes, so the story stays in one thread. When a service account acts, log the action at the target and the broker with the same correlation identifier, which turns troubleshooting into a straight line rather than a maze you have to reconstruct under pressure. You prove controls the same way you built them, with small samples that tie to real work and artifacts that speak for themselves. Run sampled access reviews that pick a handful of people and service identities from high-risk groups every week. Then walk the thread from request to approval to grant to use, and write down what you found in a few lines that include ticket links and dates. When you find a mismatch, fix it. Show the commit or the change that removed the right, and keep the before and after in the same place so the correction becomes teachable material for the team. Proving control is not a separate project. It is a refinement loop that keeps everyone honest and improves the system with each pass, which is why you keep the cadence frequent and the sample small enough to finish. Over time, these proof points become the easiest pages in your audit binder, because they show a living control rather than a stage set built for one review. Exceptions will come, but they should be narrow, explained in plain language, and set to expire unless someone does the work to reapprove them. When a team cannot meet a duty separation rule for a short window, write the risk in terms anyone can follow, name the compensating controls, capture the owner, and set the sunset date with a clock that notifies people before it rings. Keep exceptions in a simple list that leaders review on a regular rhythm and prune it mercilessly so it does not become a second policy with lower standards, which is a common failure that undermines good intent. When an exception expires, the system should remove the extra rights and notify the owner. And reapproval should require fresh eyes that read the risk as it stands today rather than the memory of last quarter. This discipline keeps the edge cases from dissolving your baseline, and it turns exceptions into a clear, bounded practice rather than a fog that hides drift. Measurement gives least privilege a heartbeat you can feel, and it keeps the conversation grounded in outcomes instead of slogans. Track how many admin elevations occur each week, how long they last, how often they include full session capture, and how many of those sessions required coaching or correction, because those numbers tell you where to invest. Measure dormant accounts discovered and removed, stale tokens rotated, shared accounts retired, and service accounts that moved from broad scope to narrow scope with clear owners, since each of those cuts off a potential path for misuse. Watch review completion times and the fraction of rights removed during reviews, which signals whether managers are reading or rubber stamping. And connect those outcomes to incident trends so teams see how discipline changes the real world. When leaders read metrics that are tied to small, visible actions, they give you support to keep going, and that support is what turns a good quarter into a durable practice. Evidence ties the whole picture together so that any stakeholder can verify the story without relying on the memories of a few experts. Keep the request tickets, the approvals, the group changes, the connector logs, the elevation transcripts, and the review decisions in one place that is easy to query by person, by group, by system, or by date, which turns investigations into simple searches. Use consistent identifiers for people and service accounts across systems so a timeline reads like a single thread rather than a stack of unrelated notes. And keep time zones in one time zone with a clear clock source to avoid the confusion that so often burns hours. When you run a sample, store the findings with the links to the evidence you used. And when you fix something, attach the change record that shows the time and the owner, which makes every improvement part of the permanent trail. With that fabric in place, you do not have to perform for an audit. You simply show the truth of daily work. Close the loop by picking one high-risk group this week and trimming its permissions while you track results that matter to safety and clarity. Choose a group with many members, broad scope, or standing admin rights, announce the change, and move its most dangerous permission into just-in-time elevation with multi-factor and session capture. Then measure how often it triggers, how long sessions last, and how many requests need coaching. Watch incident and alert patterns for a few weeks and see whether the attack surface shrinks or whether people discover better ways to perform the task with less power, which often happens once friction reveals old habits. Share the before and after in a short memo that uses plain words, the business task as the frame, and 1 or 2 graphs that show fewer standing rights and faster reviews, because stories with pictures stick. The exercise will teach you where to go next, and it will prove that least privilege is not a theory or a slogan. It is a series of small, careful steps that any team can take and any auditor can confirm without a struggle. Least privilege endures when it feels like part of normal work rather than a special project, and that happens when roles tell the truth, grants expire by default, duties are split with clean lines, and elevation is brief, visible, and captured without fuss. It becomes easier when your identity source is strong, your groups have owners, your connectors write searchable logs, and your systems refuse to drift into direct assignment, because structure does the heavy lifting that memory never will. It grows stronger when shared accounts disappear, service accounts shrink in scope, external sessions pass through gates that understand risk, and stale objects fall into quarantine where they can do no harm, which keeps your environment tidy in the quiet hours between reviews. It proves itself when samples tell a tight story with ticket links and remediation evidence, when exceptions live on clocks with clear owners, and when one trimmed group becomes a model others copy. That is how you end up with a smaller blast radius, and with oversight you can show any day you are asked, and that is the surest way to keep trust in a world that gives attackers too many chances. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.